As we continue our special look at the life and career of a living legend, Lennox Lewis, former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, we are joined by a gentleman who knows Lennox quite well. As a matter of fact, he was his manager for a number of years, and we're talking about Frank Maloney. Good day to you, Frank, and welcome to KLAS.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting about Lennox Lewis, one of the best boxers that I had the privilege of working with, or the best boxer I had the privilege of working with.
Talk to us about that. How did you get in touch or started to manage Lennox Lewis and his career?
It's a very long story, actually. You know, I was a small hall promoter in London. I always dreamed about becoming a big-time boxing promoter, and I always knew to do that you needed a heavyweight. I saw how successful Mickey Duff and his team was with a fighter called Frank Bruno, and he never actually won nothing at that time. He fought for the world title and got beat twice, but he was a national hero. And, you know, I found out Lennox, though he represented Canada in the Olympic Games and won the gold medal, he was actually British and came from East London, near West Ham football ground. So I pursued him consistently until he agreed to come and meet me, or his lawyer agreed that him and Lennox would come over and meet me. And from then I just kept pursuing him, and eventually he gave in and agreed to sign contracts with me, because I put together a consortium of businessmen that raised some finance so that its operation could be done.
Mm-hmm. And as they say, the rest is history, huh?
Yeah, it was nice history. It was nice history. It was, you know, it was an unbelievable ride, an unbelievable story, but it was, you know, down to the man himself, because, you know, we can only do certain things, but he's got to get in the ring and fight. And, you know, I've been in boxing since I was 10 years old. I've worked with a number of fighters. So I've got to say Lennox was one of the most dedicated fighters and most professional fighters I've worked with. His preparation was second to none. There was nothing left unturned. And, you know, he would constantly demand perfection from his team around him.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You mentioned about his exploits for Canada at the 1988 Seoul Olympic Games, but a lot of people would have known about Lennox on the European circuit, because he was actually stationed there and became a British Commonwealth heavyweight champion and European champion, all of that. At what stage did you realize that, hey, this is an international fighter who demands and deserves to be recognized around the world?
Well, no, this was Lennox himself. I used to always say to Lennox, we got to sell you into the British public, you know, this is our job. And Lennox would go, Frank, that's your job. He said, I am a person of the world. I was born in England. I have Jamaican blood in with me. My mother's from Jamaica, so I have a loyalty to Jamaica. And I grew up in Canada and was educated and won the medal. So I am a boxer of the world, a subject of the world, he used to call himself.
Yes, I was
which
reading...
I thought was a very good, which was appropriate for the man, because that's how he saw himself.
Yes, I was reading an article written by Phil DJ from World Boxing News, and he mentioned in his article that Lennox is probably, if not the best, then certainly one of the best heavyweights of all time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would put Lennox somewhere in the top 5 heavyweights of all times. You know, people don't. The problem was, when Lennox was winning and was around, people didn't give him the credit he deserved. When Lennox has gone and they've seen what they're left with, they all miss him. It's like you've got a good woman, isn't it? You don't appreciate her until she goes and leaves you and finds someone else.
That's a good way to put it.
So Lennox was the same sort of thing. You know, today now people talk to me all the time about Lennox Lewis. They mention how good, and I think to myself, well, why didn't you say that when he was here in Britain? Why wasn't you one of them supporters? You know, we built up a great fan base, and he was great for the community. He had a number of white supporters, he had a number of black supporters. He brought together the communities on the streets of London, on the streets of Britain, I should say, which was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Now, you saw him reach to the pinnacle where he was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, unifying the WBC, the WBA, the IBO, and the IBF titles. What kind of satisfaction did you get, Frank, from seeing that kind of happenings around you?
Do you know what? I saw all Lennox's moves, actually. I saw the night he got beat by Oliver McCall when we sat in a dressing room and in a hotel room and without any lights on, and we looked at the sadness and what had gone wrong and how he would come back. You know, I admire the man for how he dedicated himself to come back and regain his title. We went through a lot to get his title back. I saw the draw with Evander Holyfield, which we were robbed for the unification fight, but it actually worked in our favour because of the publicity and the outcry of it. I saw it when he beat Lennox, when he beat Evander and become undisputed champion in Las Vegas, which was a fantastic night for British, Jamaican and Canadian boxing, because it was the first time an undisputed heavyweight champion of the world came from outside of America for over 100 years. So it was something very special. And I was in South Africa, and when Lennox Lewis got beat, unfortunately, to me, that wasn't really Lennox's fault. It was the people around Lennox. Some new people had come into the team, business advisors. They wasn't boxing people, and they like to do things different. And, you know, unfortunately for me, I had a fallout with these people. I never personally had a fallout with Lennox Lewis. I know I was mad when I left after that fight, or some say I was sacked, some say I walked away. But it was, for me, that was the saddest day of my life, the day I left Lennox Lewis, because it wasn't how I wanted it to happen. I never got the opportunity to sit and talk to Lennox Lewis due to the new people around him. And I'm sure if Lennox and I had sat down, we would have solved or got to the bottom of the problem. To me, there was never no problem with myself and Lennox, and I hope Lennox feels the same way. The problem was with certain people around Lennox who were sort of had their own agenda, let's say. That, you know, that's where it went wrong for me, because I was very protective of Lennox. I know when I left him, I said some things I probably shouldn't have said, more in anger than thinking and being logicked. But, you know, now, I hold my hands up and say, you know, he was probably the best fighter I've ever worked with, and probably will be the best fighter I've ever worked with. And it was an opportunity that he gave me, and I was very appreciative of it.
Yes. You mentioned some of the fights that he lost, the two actually, and the one draw against Evander Holyfield. What about some of the great fights in your estimation? Which ones come to your mind readily when you think of Lennox Lewis fighting in the ring?
You know what? I think a load of them. There was a night when he beat Frank Bruno. Because I know, and I'm not sure a lot of people do know this, Lennox wasn't very well when I tried to talk him out of having that fight. And I remember him saying to me, Frank, if I can't beat Frank Bruno, I better give up boxing. And I'm thinking, boy, you know, you shouldn't do it. And he was sitting in the dressing room. He wasn't well. You know, he had a temperature, but he went out and done the job. Probably the best night, maybe, was the Razor Ruddock fight. That was unbelievable. I mean, that was the night when it was either all going to finish or Lennox was going to raise to an occasion. And he was, out of all the team was nervous that night. I remember every one of the guys that in the team, you know, we were all nervous, including myself. I walked for miles, and in the end, I walked up to Lennox's hotel room. He was sitting there, and, you know, and I knocked on the door. He was sitting there watching some films and had some music going on in the background, because he used to love to watch kung fu martial art tapes. And he had music going on in the background. And we sat there and we were talking, and he looked at me and he went, "Why are you so worried?" And I went, well, you know, I didn't know what to say. And he came over to me and he went to me, "Frank, do not worry. We will win this fight. I will win this fight, and we will go forward." And you know what? I left his hotel room and I thought, this man is so confident of his own ability, of his own, you know, we've done our job. We've got the fight in England. We've got the English crowd behind him. It's all now down to him. In the next couple of hours, he will either go down in the history books or it will all be over. Yes. You know what? Within 2 rounds, it was all over, and we were flying. It was an unbelievable night. You know, that night will live with me forever. And then there was the Shannon Briggs fight in Atlantic City, which was like a shootout in the OK Corral. There was the Tommy Morrison fight. There was the night in New York when he destroyed Michael Grant, when the Americans desperately were backing Michael Grant to win and all wanting to see the end of Lennox Lewis, you know, and there was the Andrew Galotta fight. There's so many good nights. And there's nights before that, before Lennox he became champion. The Gary Mason fight. I remember Mickey Duff saying to me, "You've made this fight too soon for your man. You know, you don't know this business." And I went, "Mickey, let me tell you something. Gary Mason, God rest his soul, didn't even win the regional ABA titles. My man won the Olympic gold medal. If he can't beat Gary Mason, we've all got this wrong in boxing. Well, Gary put up the fight of his life, and Gary was number 3 in the world. If I was Gary Mason's manager, I would have given Lennox Lewis the widest berth you could have given him, because Gary Mason had nothing to gain by fighting Lennox Lewis, everything to lose. Lennox Lewis had everything to gain because he was a new kid on the block.
Yes. Wow, this is great.
So he went out. Sorry, he went out and done a great job, and then that's when the British crowd really started appreciating and understanding that Lennox Lewis was the real article.
Yes. Well, I tell you, Frank, this is great, and we just want to say thanks for sharing with us today on the KLAS Sports Fusion, and we hope that we'll continue to hear more about some of the boxers that you will have in the future, and thanks for sharing with us on Lennox Lewis today. No,
I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Frank Maloney, former manager for the legendary, the living icon. We are talking about Lennox Lewis, who retired from the sports 9 years ago, just as if it were yesterday, and still having a name all over the world.